First, I want to explain that although the Nature Society of Singapore was formed only in 1991, we are celebrating its 70th anniversary. So, how did the 70 come from? The reason is that the Nature Society traces its birth back to 1954, when it began life as a Singapore branch of the Malayan Nature Society. I became patron of the society in 1990, and I persuaded my Singapore colleagues to separate from the Malayan Nature Society and become independent. I felt it was appropriate since our two countries have been separate for 26 years.
Well, in the beginning, most people were not interested in nature because they were looking for food. And later on, slowly, they got aware and many people are interested. And that's where the society come into play.
Nature lovers like me joined because we wanted to enjoy nature, learn to appreciate it better, and learn from other members. The pleasure was being with other people whom you also knew loved nature.
As a society mostly of experts, of scientists, scholars, it never wanted to be an advocacy NGO, no? But over time, it began to acquire this position because they felt that nature doesn't speak, and our trees and our wildlife needed voices, that we should be the champions of nature and wildlife in Singapore.
In the 80s and 90s, we had very rapid economic development. We found that a lot of our nature areas were just gone. So we had a new role. We had to protect nature. And this is not what we were trained for, but we tried every means we could. We wrote petitions, we wrote letters to the minister, we went to the press. We tried all these. Sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't. So we realized we needed to work with the government. And the challenge was to demonstrate to them that nature itself, biodiversity itself, was valuable. Valuable to Singapore's sustainability and future development. Now everyone knows that without nature we wouldn't survive. But in those days, it was a bit of a hard sell.
At that time, my friend told me that Richard Hale have discovered a bird wading site at Sungai Buloh. So I was fascinated and excited. When we went there, the whole place was actually quite bare. The farmers were on the process of moving out because the government planned to create a high-tech farm over there. But we managed to get in and saw the fantastic scene. Migratory wading birds took off in thousands. So we decided that we should conserve this place. So I went back to the bird group that we should do something to save the area. At the end of 1987, the proposal was ready. At that time, of course, we were very cautious and apprehensive about government reaction to such a proposal. It will be the first time in the history of nature conservation in Singapore. So it came out in the early 90s. They decided to create the place as a nature park. After we were successful in getting the place conserved as a nature park, we were in a way encouraged and quite emboldened to think on a larger scale, do more for nature conservation.
I think both have changed. The government has changed, but society also changed. We have become more realistic that you can't conserve every site, But over the years, the government also has changed. It became conscious that it wanted to reinvent Singapore. First as a city in a garden, and then now a city in nature. So we are now partners in conserving biodiversity and wildlife in Singapore.
It's the most melodious songbird in Singapore, and we are working with MPark to protect them. I remember joining the Nature Society in the 90s to actually trespass into the KTM land, especially the stretch around Bukit Timah. Beautiful place for bird watching. Early in the morning, you will see the mist enveloping the corridor. It was lovely. May 2010, to my surprise, I see Sri Sam actually make a report saying that Malaysia will hand back the land to Singapore in 2011. I just wrote a short, simple forum letter to the Straits Times to ask them, please keep the place as the nature corridor. Don't parcel it out for private development. But I'm surprised straight away they published that forum letter. The EXCO heard about it and saw it. Since you make so much noise, why don't you drive a campaign? Which I did lah. So I actually gathered some like-minded people, architects, young architects, and actually formed a team to come up with a proposal. Arising from the forum letter, there were quite a few of these, developers and architects was saying that no way this can happen. It's too audacious. So we actually submitted the proposal back in October 2010. But nothing was heard until a few weeks just before the actual hangover in July 2011. I got a call from the Ministry of National Development. Hey, come, let's talk. So from there on, they actually formed a focus group, and until today, we've been discussing on how to develop this former railway land into the Green Corridor, and now the Rail Corridor. And I was also very happy that Lee Hsien Loong, during his National Day rally speech, mentioned about the Green Corridor. So we're very happy about it, beyond my wildest dream, in fact, To us, it's like a major success, this campaign for the Rail Corridor.
So in 2024, we are celebrating our 70th anniversary. NSS is established in 1954, which makes us one of the oldest NGO in Singapore. For me, learning about the legacy of what NSS have done for the conservation of Singapore makes me feel like I'm standing on the shoulder of giants. What we are enjoying now is actually the conservation successes of Nature Society over the last few decades. Now it is time for the next generation to step up, to carry on with the good work, to continue this conservation journey in Singapore.
As somebody who's been with the society for so long, I really felt we owed something, not just to the leadership that came before us, but to every volunteer who put in hours, not for recognition, not for fame, but because they believe that Singapore with nature is a better Singapore.
I'm very encouraged. I think over the last 30 years, I see more and more Singaporeans care about nature, care about the environment, care about climate change. And this is particularly so among young Singaporeans. So I think the future is bright.
Most of them are willing to volunteer. That's the best thing.
When people think of conservation, often it's really just the sort of the physical environments. And I think, of course, that's important. But really, before we start greening the physical environment, I really think it's about changing ourselves from the inside, that the forests aren't just out there, but the reefs, rivers, streams, forests, all inside here. It's in our hearts. It's worth protecting because that's the right thing to do. I really hope that, for me, helping achieve that would be the ultimate dream for the Nature Society.